In 1848, a mill was built here, and it wasn't just a small mill. It was a 3-story, magnificent piece of architecture. It was really a sight to behold. And I can remember coming up here, and the old shell of a building was still standing, and we would crawl all the way up to the 3rd floor on the thing, on the rickety stairs.
This was in what year?
This was on up until
early 70s?
Yeah, well, no, late 1980s. I think it probably collapsed about 1990 or 91 maybe. But it was still standing and in good condition. And that's pretty much what we came up here to see, is that, because your family, I believe, was the last operated. Is that right?
Yes, members of the family were the last, and that was in the early 1950s. So that's when it sort of ceased to run, essentially. But it sat here empty for quite a while. It did. Many years.
It was sold to Mr. Gerald Saunders, and he was in the timber business. He was not into grinding corn, and that had kind of fallen out of fashion by the 1950s. So the mill was abandoned, and it stood, and it was just a place where a lot of people went, and it was kind of a hangout for a while. People would fish down there on the creek and go to the mill. But various things from the mill got scattered about. People kind of helped themselves to things, and Dr. Stinson in Waverly Hall, he had a little museum, Dr. Forrest Stinson, and Dr. Stinson collected all kind of things, and a lot of people around here, Dr. Stinson was one of these old doctors that made house calls, and a lot of people could not afford to pay their medical bills, so they knew he collected old things, and they would trade his medical services for just objects. He had old guns and clocks and you name it. He had it in that drugstore. Well, he transformed his drugstore into a little museum. And sometime around 1960, he had an auction and sold everything out of that museum. And the museum was purchased by Mr. L.D. Reeves. And Mr. Reeves is the grandfather of all the Reeves and Bowdens in Waverly Hall and around here, and one of the grandsons of Mr. L.D. being Ben Reeves, who's in the antique business in Waverly Hall. Well, anyway, sometime about 1973, Mr. L.D. Reeves donated what was left from the museum, because he retired from that and sold everything, and some of the things that were not wanted were left behind. And he donated all those things to our schoolhouse here when we had used to have Halloween carnivals. And at Halloween time, that was a fundraiser. And he donated all these old things, and they took bids. And my dad bid on some of the things and won them. And one of the items was Dr. Stinson had an original wooden, I don't know what the proper terminology is for it, but it's a wooden gear from the Oak Mountain Mill, and it's one of the original pieces. It's probably the only piece left in Harris County that I know of. Yeah. But anyway, I was talking to my mother, and I have decided to present you with the wooden wheel.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it is yours.
Oh my God!
Since you are descended from the owners of the mill, your family was the last people who operated the mill, then the wooden wheel is yours. And it's we brought it with us today. We'll show it in a few minutes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I remember your granddaddy pretty well, George.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Because he ran the mill for a time in the 40s.
Yeah,
late 30s, early 40s, I think.
Yeah, that's what I was telling him. The Reeses were the only ones that I knew ran it.
Because she was, her mom, T.C. Reese was married to Ethel McDaniel. And that was a first cousin of my grandfather, George. And when he went off to Waverly Hall to run a dairy at his home place where he grew up, he called Ethel's husband, T.C. Reese, and said, hey, you want to come out and run the mill for me? And then that's how they lived out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, they lived, ran until it shut down.
Right. And then it sat empty for years and years and years. And somebody told me, maybe Ellis, your brother, that there was a Georgia governor, Dick Russell.
Yeah.
And his brother-in-law wanted the wheel and took it apart. He was going to put it up in a park in Winder, is that right?
Yeah.
But as far as I can tell, that never happened.
Okay. Well, they
and
got
I don't
the
know
wheel.
what year that
I remember
was.
that. That
Maybe
wheel
in the
was
60s?
That wheel
Late
was
50s.
probably close to 3 stories tall.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they had to probably number the wood when they took it apart or something to rebuild it.
It was metal.
Oh, it was?
It was all metal.
Oh, that makes sense, I guess. Huh.
And that thing was a very simple concept. What they did up there on the creek, they had the dam. So they dug a canal down through there. And it just had a wood door. They could raise and lower to speed up the wheel.
Oh, wow.
And they had a pipe running across there, and it just ran out of that and hit the wheel and turned it.
Huh.
Yeah.
What year do you think it was that the wheel went missing?
I don't
Had to
know.
have been the late 50s at least.
Yeah, it had to be
sometime
in the late 50s, around 60 that it broke down.
So we're out here in the woods now, gonna go check out the old mill ruins. This is actually the old railroad bed that used to run through Cleola, and you can see it cut through all the way through the woods down there. And there's also this old house overlooking the railroad right there. We're gonna take a look at that after we check out the mill. So the old mill ruins are just down there. You can already see the rock poking out. I guess we're trying to figure out a safe way to get down there.
Okay, the mill itself stood right there. And that down there was the public road bed.
Okay.
Public road came right up through here, and somewhere right up here, it crossed over the railroad track.
So it ran right beside the railroad.
So somewhere along about right here is where that picture was made of
My Aunt Drew.
your Aunt Jewel standing on the railroad track.
That was here.
It was along about right here looking at the mill.
Oh, okay. I've always wondered kind of how that was worked.
That was right here.
I'll share that with Robert for the video.
Absolutely.
So if y'all want to go, it would have been easier to gone down up there and walk to the mill,
let's do
because
that.
this is all. I was thinking that there was a place up here where the road had crossed the railroad that was easier to cross, but it's overgrown with these, whatever this is.
I don't know, but they got thorns on them.
They sure do.
Big old thorns.
Wow. It's amazing all that wood is gone.
So this thing just fell into the ground or rotted into the ground.
It did.
It wasn't torn down. I see
No.
the roof is still here. All the tin on the ground.
Yeah. Okay, this was the addition back here. From there to here. This was added on in 1915.
Is that the werewolf of Cleola?
I was about to say shouldn't be a dog up there. But this was added on in 1915, and this was the flour mill department,
Okay.
where they had the flour sifters and everything back here. It almost looks like it was added on twice. Look at that wall under there.
I see. All right, let me set this old wooden spoked wheel that actually came out of this mill. I'm going to set it down in case we have to throw it at the dog. So what are we looking at, Dan?
Okay, this was the foundation for the mill. The mill, this part over here, as you can see, I said it was 3 stories high. It was actually 4 stories because you could walk under it. That's how high it was off the ground. And this was all just like crawl space under a house, except you could stand up under here. And this was all just a dirt floor underneath. You could come under here, and I remember the big floor joists that held this thing up. They were massive, and you could see the wooden pegs that were from the mortise and tenon joints. It all collapsed and fell, and it was just everything rotted right here in place. There was no way in here to get any of the lumber out, so nobody salvaged anything here at all that I'm aware of. There's part of a millstone right there that was possibly the one that Mr. Milner was telling us about that broke during operation.
Now, Dan, how old was this mill?
I think the actual building was built in the 1840s. I'm going to do a little bit more research and write a little history of the early part of it. And Joy's going to write the history of the later part. But the mill original property was purchased by Mr. Marshall in 1828. And by the time the mill got into operation, it was known as Marshall and Stanford's Mill. And he had a partner, Dr. H.K. Stanford of Waverly Hall. And later it became Marshall and Leonard's. Mr. Leonard from Tauberton bought part of the mill, and I think that was after Stanford was no longer a part of the partnership. But sometime around the 1890s, I think it became known as Oak Mountain Mill, and I believe that was maybe when the Milners purchased it. But there was even some members of the Ingram family owned it at one time, and some Williams operated it, I believe, at some point.
And it operated for a long time.
It did. This was a big operation. It's very well known.
There's the millstone. And as Dan said, this may have been the one that broke. And when operations ceased here was when
Really?
this broke
Okay.
and broke the shoulder of the lady who was running it. This was a massive structure, though.
No. Dry stacked rocks. You can see that this was the original foundation, and then all that back there was an addition later.
What would they have milled here?
This started out as a corn grinding mill. Wheat was not really grown here too much. I don't know why that was, but wheat was generally imported, and folks in the South didn't really eat much made with wheat. They lived off of cornbread, cornmeal, and later on wheat became a staple around here. The farmers were trying to adapt to other things to grow here when cotton started its decline. So in 1915 is when Mr. Milner finally got this up, and he was encouraging farmers to grow wheat. And they did. They grew it here for a long time. There's some iron thing right there.
I don't know.
Something that a iron rod ran through. But you cannot imagine the pile of lumber that was here. It was a mountain on top of these foundation walls of lumber when this thing collapsed. And then as the lumber started to rot, it was scary to climb up on it because you could fall down in the middle of it and not be able to get out. Our recent rain and flood that we've had, you can see washed up in here. Now this over here has fallen. All of this wall here has, but that's where the mill wheel was mounted.
Described as a 3-story wheel, if I'm not mistaken. Dan, let me get you to stand up against that pillar so people can see just how big that foundation pillar is right there.
You see these, where they split these rock? These rock were mined out of the local hillsides. They drilled holes in here. And you know, there was 2 ways they could have done that. But I'm thinking, since they're spaced so close together, they would have driven wooden pegs tightly into those holes and either wet those wooden pegs and let them swell up, or they drove them in there and they actually cracked the rock. some places they had to allow for the swelling to do the crack, but there's only 2 in that one. That was hard labor building this. Can you imagine?
Oh, not at all. And it's hard to believe, looking at it, what a big staple of the community, you know, this was, or this
Yeah.
area.
Oh,
I should say, not just this community, but this whole area.
I don't know, Dan, you might know better, but I feel like this could be one of the better sort of examples of mill ruins that's still standing.
Oh yes, this is an excellent example of that.
Look at this. I don't know what it was, but it was patented December 13th, 1904.
That is where the mill wheel was mounted.
Wow.
Or excuse me, not the wheel itself, but the braces for it. It had big braces that went up like an A-frame,
Gotcha.
and then the center shaft of the wheel was way up there, and it went into the side of the building up there. And this is where, directly above our heads, above the mill wheel, was a privy built out on the side of the building, the toilet, so that when a person used the privy, there was a hole that went down into the water here. This big mill wheel turning. You see that? That's called the race. That's where the water was brought from the dam. And that originally had a wooden trough. Well, years later, they put that permanent corrugated galvanized pipe there, and that carried water here and turned the wheel. And once the water came off the wheel, it went down this race right over here. And see, this all would have been a little mill pond here when they actually turned the water on to this thing and got it going. And the water returned to the creek right through here. Now this was, back in those days, this was called Mulberry Creek, but it's actually a tributary to Mulberry Creek. Later on, it was renamed Sparks Creek, because Sparks Creek and Dials Mill Creek all run together just south of here to form the Mulberry. The Mulberry runs all the way to the Chattahoochee River. Wow, the storms have really brought a lot of trash and debris in here and filled this in. This
Yeah,
used
yeah.
to,
My
this
feet
used
are
to be,
sinking.
Yeah, this used to be really deep up through here. But now see, the dam was on up above here.
Now, is
There
it
was-
still there?
The foundation for it is. The actual dam across the creek was built out of wood, and I can remember the remains of that. But the rock walls that went out to the wooden part, they still exist, and that's a sight to behold. We're going to see that in a few minutes. But you can see the foundations for the mill race over there.
Yeah, let me see if I can get a closer shot of that. And would have gone over to the mill right there. Look, there's initials carved in this stone.
So I'm super excited right now because these are the initials of my grandfather, William Henry Milner. And so he ran the mill, and he died in 1925. He actually had a little pimple on his cheek, and it wouldn't heal, and it wouldn't heal. It ended up being mouth cancer. I believe he smoked or chewed tobacco. And so when he died, my grandfather, so William Henry's had 3 daughters, and the youngest was my grandmother, Mary Louise Milner. She married George Lamar McDaniel, and so when he died, George ended up taking over the running of the mill. And I was telling them earlier, he also was paid by the railroad to what is it called? It was the water pump that would fill the steam for the locomotive over by the depot, right? Over by the depot. We were just talking about it.
The water tank.
The water tank, yeah.
Yes, there was a Cypress water tank over there that they would fill from the creek.
And they would put it in the steam locomotive,
That's right.
right? So the railroad actually paid him, you know, he got money from doing that. So he did that. And then he wanted to be a dairy farmer back over in Waverly Hall. And so when they left, he called T.C. Reese, who was the husband of Ethel McDaniel, who was his first cousin, and said, hey, would you come run the mill? And we've talked about that already. So I was just really hoping that this was still here and these ruins were still standing, because obviously that's pretty, there's really no pieces of physical family history of him, except for there are 2 photographs. I'll have to share that. But, you know, I just think of him being over here and wanting to make his mark, and here it still is in 2024, which I think is pretty cool.
So Joy, the foundation there, I noticed that all the other foundations here are dry stacked stone. This one is concrete. So apparently this was rebuilt. The reason he put his a name on that. So
yeah, I was kind of wondering what was.
So that's how he was able to put that piece in there with his initials on it.
And look at these stones, how interesting, the colors, and they're all so different. Yeah. And really, look at the variation in the stones on there. I mean, look at this one. How pretty that is. Like, I don't know. It's cool to think of them.
And see, compare it to this one over here. See, this one is dry stacked. They had a lot of floods over the years. I was reading a newspaper article the other night, sometime in the 1880s, I believe, there was a great flood and washed away the dam. So the dam had to be rebuilt. This has changed us a lot, so much since the railroad was taken up. I think the railroad was finally abandoned and tracks were removed around 1993 maybe, or 94. But the water is now diverted down through here from the railroad track. There used to be a culvert around here that it was diverted through and went to the creek. But now it just comes straight down through here, and that's the reason this is filled in. So it's another section of a pier, but it's concreted together. There's part of it. I think it fell from up there. That was all built to hold that earth back in place, and it's fallen. This hasn't been here long. This fell is what I mean. Recent years. So let's go up here and look at the dam remains. The water is back in the original, back to the original flow that it would have been when Mr. Marshall first walked through these woods. Now you see where the dam was? See the rock wall up there?
Yeah.
And then it was wood from there across. You can see the remains of it.
Okay, yeah.
And then the rock wall over here.
And there was a heck of a pond behind that, because
Yes.
that was a big dam.
That was a deep pond too.
Well, you know we got to walk up there, so let's find the path of least resistance. So William Marshall would have seen this and decided this is where his mill's going to be.
That's right.
And it is absolutely beautiful. There's Mr. Dan over by the dam.
I haven't been here in about 32 years, but based on my memory of this is filled in with sand unbelievably. I mean, if you look up that tree right there, you can see how this is built up. Over there, there's an overflow spillway built into that wall. Not an overflow, but it was a place where water could come through. That used to be where you could walk back in it. You could kind of bend down and go back in there, probably about 3-4 feet. That's all filled up. This is all built up. If it continues like this in another 40 years, it'll be up another 4 or 5 feet high with sand. I didn't realize it had washed in so much.
I bet it's partly because when this creek floods, this is still blocking some of the flow of water, so it's not able to carry it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see right there how much it's just spilled in.
And you can feel how boggy it is under our feet.
Yeah.
That this was much deeper than, it was down like that. But this is filled up. You used to be able to go up in there about 4 or 5 feet maybe.
This is a tall dam. It reminds me more of some of the dams that you see in the mills of Columbus.
Yeah.
Not one that you'd think of way out here.
But
And talk about the work to stack some stone.
that was some more work. It's a work of art.
It is.
Look how each rock is placed. There's no straight line, which would be weak. They would never put more than 3 rock in a row. It had to be a break in it.
And the little rocks to fill in the voids.
Mm-hmm.
This is the mill race door that Dan was talking about earlier, that they would, obviously the dam was here, this would have been a mill pond and held an amazing amount of water, really, when you see how big this dam is. And then they would have had it gated here, and this door would have opened and closed and let all of this water meter through here and run down this race here, down this ditch, and down this elevation drop to power that mill wheel. And look at just how high up this is. And all of this would have been mill pond right here. And here's the old railroad bridge. Right here, remember when we started out, we were walking down the old railroad. And there's the railroad bed as it comes down along beside the mill and then turned right here to cross the creek. Or at the time, I reckon this would have been the pond. There's the bed to the railroad. And the footers to the old railroad bridge. You can see the other one across the creek. And this one right here. And there's some bits and pieces of railroad metal scattered throughout here. It's amazing what has come and gone from this place and the signs of the infrastructure that used to be here. We have abandoned railroad here, the abandoned mill, and really the ghost town of Cleola. And there is actually a rail right there from the railroad. And I was hoping that maybe we might be able to get a date off of it, because these railroad rails are stamped with a manufacturer and a date, but it looks like it's pretty corroded, pretty filled up with stuff right there. Yeah, so maybe not. That's it, there's the railroad right there, the railroad rail. So I'm back up here just above the railroad bridge, back on the old rail bed, where of course the railroad used to come through. And I just wanted to show, when they were building this railroad, what they had to go through here to do that, is cutting through this rock. Of course, there was no shortage of this rock to build, like the dam and the mill foundation that we saw. But they had to cut through this rock, and it's on either side of us, to lay this track here. So many years ago. It's amazing. It's really amazing to see, you know, I guess the footprint that's left behind.
So this is where the door was that went into the mill on the ground floor. The road came in right up here. That's the old road bed. So this is where trucks would pull up and load and unload, and you know, wagons, of course, back before trucks came along, but the wagons would all pull up here and load and unload the corn and the meal. And this was the entrance that all the public used. And so there's no telling how many hundreds of feet went over that rock right there into the building.
What did it look like on the inside, Ben?
On the inside, of course, it had never seen a coat of paint. It was never painted. It was all built out of heart pine, wide pine board floors. Everything in there was hand hewn. All of the rafters, the beams, everything were, they were large. I mean, there's one right there. If you can still tell from the size of that, what is that, about 12 by 12? Well, it was framed up with that. Mortise and tenon. You could see the exposed wooden pegs everywhere anything was put together there. And down the middle was columns. I'd say the columns were probably 14 by 14 square that held up the upper floors. And over here was a set of stairs that went up to the second floor, and another set of stairs up to the third floor. Look there, Joy, there's the latch off of the door. That is a blacksmith made latch. It sure is. How about that? That was laying there as if to say hello to you, Joy.
So Dan, what was it like walking in this building when it still stood?
When I went in it, it was still sturdy. It was a good building. And my daddy actually approached Mr. Gerald Saunders, who owned it, about buying it. And I don't know what Daddy wanted with it, but he just loved it, and he loved this area. And Mr. Gerald actually said, I will bring that up at the next board meeting. And the next board meeting that they had, well, after that, Daddy saw him. Mr. Gerald used to come out to Waverly Hall every Sunday and attended church. And he would eat lunch with his sister-in-law, our neighbor, Miss Brady. And he would eat, no, this was on Wednesday nights. He would come out to prayer meeting. Anyway, he ate supper at her house and then would walk down the sidewalk. And one day Daddy saw him and went out there and asked him, said, Mr. Gerald, did y'all ever talk about the mill? He said, yeah, we couldn't come to a decision. We decided to let it sit. And it sat. And here it sits. But our friend Roy Durham was, he was fortunate to buy the land here in recent years. And in addition to thanking Mr. Roger Milner for taking us on a tour of the store and his property, I want to thank Roy Durham, the owner of this property, because we did get permission from Roy to be here. This is private property, and we thank Roy for allowing us to come down here and document this.
And so we're making our way up to the old abandoned house here, and the railroad bed is just down there, but the yard for the house is well terraced. You can see the rock terrace that starts here and then continues up as we go towards the house. And this house is absolutely amazing. It's very uniquely built in how high off the ground it is. And those pillars underneath the house are taller than me, I think. But then the terracing continues up here. You've got this very nice terraced front yard here. This really, really squared off front yard. Which comes into steps, brick steps, that go up to the house. And we're not exactly sure the age of this house yet. We'll have a better idea once we're able to look at it. Of course, I'm sure the house would have had a front porch here that's now gone. What can you tell me about this place, Dan?
Well, I know it's known as the old Milner place, and I know that Mr. Roger across the road owns it. He's the one who gave us permission to come up here. But Mr. Ed Carlisle lived in this house one time. Mr. Ed Carlisle worked at one time for the mill, and he told me that the property line ran down the middle of the house.
Wow.
So Mr. Milner substantiated that a little while ago. He said that was true, that at one time it did. But really, to tell exactly about how old it is, you know what you got to do, Robert?
Crawl underneath the house?
Crawl underneath it.
Well, you know, this one, there is not going to be crawling underneath the house. But you know, something that I already see that's really interesting is those that we were talking about, dry stack stones down at the mill. These field stones, I mean, that one is not, but some of these field stone pillars underneath the place look dry stacked.
Yeah, this reminds me of going under the mill when it was standing. It was just very much like this. It was a little bit higher than this off the ground.
Well, normally we go inside the house first before we go underneath it, but in this case, might as well go right on under.
Yeah.
Do you have my flashlight, Dan?
I do. Well, we know that in at least what was that newspaper article? 1894, there was a sawmill here.
Yes.
So this wood is
Look at the two.
cut on a sawmill.
I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but look at the two square holes bored through.
I see that.
Just those two pieces. It must have been, it looks like they used this space down here, so they must have had something to hang
Probably
that
so.
on. There was I don't know if this would have been, do you think the original underside of this house is closed in? Because I see a doorway right there to come under here.
That's likely. Rub-a-dub-dub.
Trying to buy a bathtub,
Huh?
Ben?
I did buy a bath.
I can tell you.
I did buy a bathtub from Ben.
You lost money.
Yeah, rub-a-dub-dub.
Is that a copperhead right there?
Uh-oh.
Robert.
I'm just kidding.
Oh my god.
Oh, it's a water moccasin.
That's a cool, actually, this is like, look at the heart, I mean, I could go school. And I'm under my second house. Let's just make a note. Second house.
Pencil writing right there.
Oh, no way. It says Milner,
What?
right? It's written in like wood pencil.
Now this is stamped.
It is.
What does that say?
Lockhart.
A something. Oh, sorry.
What does that say? Doesn't that say
It
Milner?
says, there's a first name there, something Milner.
I'm trying to decipher that.
Looks like Oak, MT, Georgia.
Oak Mountain, Georgia, that's right.
Wow.
Now this was sent to him,
Oh, it
What does
says
it say?
J.
H probably or J.
J.H. Milner.
Yep.
Wow,
Okay.
that's cool.
So if that's the original floor in this house, then J.H. Milner would have been the builder. And I
Okay.
believe it is the original floor because
And-
if you look up in here, the walls are built on top of it. You see that?
And
See
they
that?
refer to him as the the Miller, Jesse Milner,
Yeah.
in the Harris County History book by Barfield.
So,
That's cool.
so this house is,
So, probably, well, I don't know, 1887 or so, I think, is when he acquired the
okay.
mill.
It's,
They were in this, although they were in the county by, like, for sure by 1830. By 1840, absolutely, they were here in the county. It's a question between like 1822 and in the 1830s, if they were here, or how many of them were here.
let's see your light for just a second, right?
Yes, sir. Joy, while Dan looks at that,
Yes.
what is your personal connection to this house?
Okay, so this house is the house that my grandmother, Mary Louise Milner McDaniel, grew up in. And she was one of 3 daughters of William Henry Milner, who we saw his initials down at the mill, and he ran the mill for a time. And so actually, my Aunt Jewel was the oldest, and she was born in 1907. So they were living here by then. And then he died in 1929. And my grandfather, George, came, by that time he and my grandmother, Mary Louise, were married. And so they lived here for a time before they went back out to Waverly Hall, which is where his home place was, which Robert has done a video of that house in the past. So that's the connection I have to this place.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and my uncles, again, they have an Irel Reese, was the last family to live in this house, was the Reese family. Their memories of this house, I mean, when they talk about this area, they talk about the water, they talk about the mill, they talk about this house. And how beautiful it was. It was very, and it is, when you go inside, I don't know if you'll still be able to see, but you know, the 2 front parlors, and it had this big molding. I mean, it was just beautifully done. There was a porch that went all the way across, and we might be able to find some of the posts in their original paint color, which was, yeah, exactly. Did you already show that? That blue color. They remember the blue of the porch, but it was a beautiful house. It really was.
Every piece of this flooring is marked Dixie, Lockhart, Alabama.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, that's very nice flooring. That would have been brought in here on the railroad. He would have used access to the railroad to have nice material imported instead of using the local mill, which would have been, at the time this was built, the mill would have been Mr. Will Pitts or the Neals down at Waverly Hall.
Oh, right.
Or, you know, up toward Shiloh, there was a couple of sawmills back up that way, but he might have wanted something nicer.
Yeah, this was a very nice house.
Each piece is stamped.
That's
You
amazing.
see it?
I do.
Each piece, it says, you can barely see it, but it says Dixie. It's got a little logo there, and then it says Lockhart, Alabama. Reading it from this direction, you can see where each piece went through the.
Are these
planer.
tick marks for a reason or no? Not really.
That's marks from where it went through the planer.
Oh, okay.
It was a carrier that carried it through.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the correct terminology is for it, but it was fed through a planer mill, and it was also tongued on one side and grooved on the other. But that's nice pine flooring.
I don't know if you caught on video Roger saying that they had intended to restore this house, and within, I think he said 3 months after, because they didn't own this property at that moment, and they bought it, intended to restore it, and 3 months later an oak tree fell through.
Yeah, that's
So that's where
Quite
it
a
ended
shame.
that. So, but I do have photos of it before the oak tree fell. Maybe I'll share that on the Facebook page.
Do you want to go in it up through there or go around?
Let's go around.
We'll go around.
I don't think we've ever been at a house that was quite this far up off the ground, have we, Dan?
No, this reminds me a lot of the Jones house out on Highway 36. It was like this.
Yeah, I remember you describing that. And so the front of this house actually faced towards the railroad.
Which, at the time the railroad was here, the road was down there also that ran parallel with the railroad. It crossed the creek and came right up through there by the mill.
It must have been a heck of a sound to listen to the train coming by this close. I mean, the train was right down there.
Oh, don't you know it?
Big steam locomotive coming by this house.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess that the trees that are helping support this house are not original. They were added in later. Would I be correct in that, Dan?
I think so. I think you are. But look at the stump where this tree was cut down when they built the house.
Oh, wow, yeah.
How about that?
That tree's been under here for... Well, so you got to figure this was a mature tree in the 1880s. So, an old tree. There's a house above my head.
It is.
All right. Oh, this is the...
This is just like the Jones house. You remember me telling you that it was on the ground in the back?
Yeah.
You could step, I mean, there was only one step up from the ground into the house. Yet on the front, the house was 18 feet high off the ground. Careful, it's being held up by one piece of wood there.
Is that a windshield frame? What is that? Oh, I think it is a windshield frame.
I believe it is.
Well, where's the rest of the car? This is the tree that fell on it.
Yeah.
Oh, look, Dan, there's the rest of the car. Actually, that's a different kind of car. There's an old car over there.
How about that?
And there's the air cleaner for it. Not really. But... Okay. Inside we go.
Which way?
Let's go in through the door since there's a sea of glass in here.
Now, Robert,
Yes, sir.
if you fall through the floor of this house, it's not falling through the floor of the bird farm.
No.
It's not like falling through that, where you only fall 2 feet.
Right. It's going to be a drop.
This is going to be a drop. So I'll let you go first.
Well, oh, wow. Everything's just, there's still stuff in here.
Yeah.
What do you make of, is this an addition right here?
No, this is the original part of the house.
Is that, they must have replaced the ceiling with drywall or something at one time. Okay, I can't see the floor, but there it's bad. There it's really bad.
Yeah.
And there it's just questionable. Okay, okay.
I think it's pretty solid right here in the middle. Yeah,
Yeah, Dan.
just throw it out of the way and go on in.
I'll let Dan film so he can get the point in which I fall 5 feet through the floor.
Well, there was 1 foot.
Hey, Joy. Joy, she came in through the bathroom window. She came in through the bathroom window.
Is that what the knocking was?
This was the car. Wasn't it? Was that the preachers, the little preacher, what do they call those little rooms they had for preachers back in the day?
A parson's room.
Parson's room. Is that what that is?
This is the back. We came in the back door. Well, I came in the window, but we came in the back door, back of the house. And this house, or these back 2 rooms were not as fancy as the front 2 rooms. And you'll be able to tell when we get in there. Yeah, I can see it from here. But like, you know, some of the walls missing here. But it was very plain. And when you get in there, you'll see big fancy moldings. And it'll be interesting to see the fireplace situation. I think it's fancier, maybe. I don't know. We'll find out when we get in there.
What is that? Henny
Henny
pen
pen.
dog food.
Good for cats, too.
Oh,
Good for
cat.
cats too.
That's awesome.
Henny pen dog food. Made in Atlanta, Georgia. This is at beaver board.
Oh, so it's not drywall?
No,
Oh, I thought it was drywall.
I think it's what was known as beaver board.
Why do I have to go first? Dan, I just want everyone to know Dan is not just being nice letting me go first. He's testing the floor.
That was a big bag of sugar.
All right, so we've got a couple really cool old refrigerators here. What is this? This is and seeing as how these refrigerators are standing here, I'm going to assume the floor is good right here. This is a cold spot, and that is unknown as of right now. Let's see if it's still.
Look on the label here. Does it say?
It says, I see thermostat relay. I'm going to try to get around. That's a nice door.
It is a
It's
nice
just like the doors in Mud House, the upside down cross,
Inverted cross.
inverted cross. All right. This is a lot lighter than a modern refrigerator. Oh, come on. The one part I wanted to see. Kelvinator. All right. So what is this? You called it beaver board? What is it?
It was a revolutionary type of seal or ceiling that came out in, I think it came out in the 1920s. And it was supposed to be, have insulation properties to it. It was supposed to be fireproof. And, you could seal a house with it, and it would add to your heating and, your comfort. But
What's all this? Just graffiti? No?
probably where there was a telephone here in the hall, and people have written
Roger
down.
said there was a telephone. Remember the
Oh, this
Yeah.
was the place where the only phone
This
was
the
in
place where the only phone is.
Cleola. Yeah.
And people would
What did
write
it say the
down
number was?
notes.
One Oak Mountain or one Cleola?
Something like that.
Yeah. This was the only telephone in Cleola. 137 Black, Dade City, Florida. And then just a bunch of other little numbers jotted down. And it's a kid scribbling on this wall.
So, Joy, do you have any idea which room your grandmother would have been born in?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't. I just remember them talking about these front two rooms being the fancy rooms for company coming and sitting in here. And I know that this room back here was the kitchen. I think there was a well, but that doesn't make sense. There was a hole for the stove. Somebody fell through it. I just remembered that when I came in here, but that was this back room that we'll go into in a minute, I think. I don't know which room they would have been born in. I would assume not the front two. Potentially. I don't know. And this fireplace isn't really that different than the one on the opposite side. I thought it might be a little fancier.
A bit of scribbling on the walls in here.
Yeah. 9/1/62? When was this house abandoned?
Well, that would have been probably in the mid to late 50s. I know for sure the Reeses were living here in 1951. There was a big ice storm, and there's photos of her Irel standing under the mill wheel, and it's giant icicles. So that was 1951. Sometime after that, Roger thought it was closer to the early 60s, or So I would say,
And Mr. Ed Carlisle lived here at some point, and he moved to Waverly Hall.
did he
and lived
run the
rest of
mill?
He worked at the mill.
Okay,
I don't know that he ran it, but he worked at it.
So I know the Reeses were the last to live here.
Mr. Ed Carlisle used to have a railroad lantern with a red globe in it that was used to flag the train, to stop the train
yeah,
down
yeah,
here.
yeah, that's cool.
If anyone needed the train to be stopped, because after it was, after the depot was done away with, if you needed the train to stop, you had to flag it. And he had the lantern that was used for that.
How long did the train keep running and after the depot was gone? Because the depot went physically, was used to build my great grandmother's house, and that would have been like that would have been late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah, the passenger train stopped running in the late 40s, but the train continued running on up until 1980, mid 80s.
Wow. Okay.
They were still hauling pulpwood for the lumber yards up here at Foster Lumber Company, and also things on up in Williamson, Georgia.
I guess so. This kind of graffiti on the wall, like since 1962, and so maybe something like that. Although I see other dates.
That's probably about the time that it became abandoned. What do you think?
Yeah.
Since 62, it's held
Yeah.
up very well.
Oh no! I mean, if that tree hadn't fallen,
Oh, yeah.
that tree falling, I think all of this has come down since I was here. I was in this house and have some photos from 2011, and it was still pretty solid. I mean, it had trash in it, but the molding was pretty pristine. The door, all of it was just that tree falling, I think, that really has done it in. But it's not as sturdy over there, maybe. I don't know, but.
Oh, this is all sealed with wood too, like this room was.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that they took out the beaver board? I mean, took out wood to seal it and put up the beaver board, or?
I don't know. We'd have to look at it and see. You can tell if it's been removed.
All right, so while we were in the house filming, my GoPro died, so I abandoned Dan and Joy back here in the woods and ran down and got a quick charge because we could not leave without filming this piece of rusty treasure sitting here rotting away in the woods for who knows how long. It's an old Ford. And you see something like this, wonder why it was parked and how long it's been here. And someone took the engine out. Actually, someone took the whole frame. This is just the body.
Joy asked me why were those called suicide doors. Do you know?
I don't. I think it might have something to do with them coming open.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, like falling open?
Yeah, just like falling open. But I don't know for sure, so someone can answer that in the comments.
Yeah.
And someone can actually comment how old this car is, because I think late 30s, but not too sure. If it was 50s, I could tell you the upholstery, isn't too bad in it. It's not too bad. That would clean up pretty nice, I think.
Just a little armor all.
Just a little armor all is all it needs. Door panels still on there. Ran when parked, says Joy. That's right. It did. It is just sinking into the ground. Very large, spacious trunk. I wonder what they would have put in the trunk.
Bottles and jars.
This is cool. Cool old car. And I look at something like this and think, man, I want this. I could fix it. Like new. This is really cool. The dashboard is immaculate. Windshield just needs some Windex. That's awesome. Tires are a little low. Probably going to need a new set of tires.
Brakes?
That's it. Brake. You don't need brakes. You don't need brakes. And the chrome is in perfect shape.
There's a piece of the chrome laying down there.
Oh, really? There's the rest of the chrome is down there? So there we go. Yeah, this car's complete. This is complete. Actually, I don't think that chrome came off of this car.
You don't think so?
No. This didn't come off of this car. This, about a 52 Chevy.
Okay.
No, I don't know. It might have come off that car. Well, Dan and Joy, I've had a phenomenal day out in the woods with y'all. It has been a blast. It really has. The Oak Mountain Mill. I have seen this house from the road as a kid. I thought it was gone because I couldn't see it anymore. The Milner store down there, I've passed for years. Always been a bucket list to see it. And I've heard, Dan, you talk about the Oak Mountain Mill, so being able to see the ruins, absolutely amazing. So thank y'all for bringing me out here today.
It was awesome. I'm lucky I got to come back again, so
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely.
Another chapter in the history of Oak Mountain.
That's right.
And next, we need to go over and do the Oak Mountain Springs.
There you go. That's right.
So watch for that next.
And apparently it brought a bunch of people to this area.
It
so
did. The
that's
newspaper
awesome.
article said hundreds of people right here in Cleola.
Which
Oh,
is
really?
hard to
Yes.
believe today.
I know. Thank you very much.
You look at it. All right, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And we will see you next time on another Adventures into History. Maybe at a spring, maybe not. I don't know. Stay tuned.